Bailey Buchanan. I'm Falkirk Council's planning convener. With us this morning we have other members of this committee and also officers. So I'm going to take you around them and they will introduce themselves.
I am Councillor Alf Kelly, Deputy Convener of Planning.
Councillor Gordon Forrest.
Bailey James Kerr.
Provost Robert Bissett. I'm Councillor for the Falkirk North Ward.
I'll take you on to officers now.
Thanks, Convener. Douglas Blythe, Legal Advisor to the committee.
Jim Miller, Committee Services Team Leader.
Carly Tolan, Graduate Democratic Services.
Julie Seidel-Gregory, Planning Advisor.
Okay, thank you. Falkirk Council's Planning Review Committee. This meeting is held in Grangemouth Community Education Unit, 69 to 71 Abbots Road. Today, Wednesday, the 2nd of October, beginning at 10 AM. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003, it has been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. The meeting will also be live streamed. First of all, in your agenda papers is apologies, but there's no apologies being declared because everybody is in attendance. That takes us to item 2 in your agenda papers, which is declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I will read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? No, none recorded. Fine, thank you. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda, pages 2 to 5. It's a minute of meeting of the Planning Review Committee held on the 29th of August 2024. Have we any questions arising from that minute?
Agreed.
Agreed the minute. Fine, thank you. That takes us to item 4 on your agenda, pages 6 to 10. It's the Planning Review Committee procedures, and I'll hand over to Mr. Douglas Blythe to take us through them. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, as you say, the procedures are outlined at pages 6 to 10 of the agenda. I won't go through them in detail, but I'll just try and summarise those. And I'll just give a bit of the legal background as to why this particular case is back before committee today. So the planning review, this is a review of an officer's delegated decision, and that's dealt with under the Scheme of Delegation and Local Review Regulations 2013. The first objective for members is to assess the paperwork before them and decide whether they have sufficient information to make a decision. And if not, there are several procedures open to them, namely site visits, written submissions and a hearing. This particular case is a review of a previous minded to grant decision, so has already been subject to several procedures, and in particular, when it was reconvened back in May, the committee decided to have further written submissions on the impact of NPF4 and to carry out a further site visit. The introduction of NPF4 in February 2023 had implications for several minded to grant decisions that the council was dealing with, including some at the planning committee. At that point, the council took external legal advice as to how best to deal with these, and the upshot of that was that it was determined that NPF4 had to be taken into account before a final decision was made. So that left any minded to grant decisions left the council with a choice as to how to deal with those. They had to be reassessed, and in some cases, if there was nothing significant or material, then decisions could be issued. However, if there was new material or new policy that was significant or material, then the advice was that these would have to be reassessed. And that's been the case in several applications. The committee dealt with one at Brayfoot Road recently, and another example from Planning Committee was the Gilston application, which fell into that category. There's no clear legal rule as to what information has to be reconsidered by excuse me, by the committee. However, as with any planning decision, that has to be taken in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations dictate otherwise. So the introduction of a new policy document such as MPF4 is a quite obvious and significant new policy regime. So against that context, members can, if they see fit, decide the matter afresh. And the only caveat to that is that they give valid and intelligible reasons as to why they're taking that decision, and in particular if they're looking to reverse a previous minded to grant decision. Given the new MPF4 introduction, and in particular the policies 15 and 16, which had no direct equivalent in LDP2, the recommendation or the procedure notice from May invited the applicant to submit representations on the impact of MPF4 on the development, with particular reference to those two policies, but with wider reference to any other MPF4 policies that were felt to be relevant. That submission was then sent to the Planning Authority and those who had previously submitted representations, and those papers are before the committee today. Mrs. Seidel-Gregory will go in due course into the policy position in a bit more detail, but members are invited to assess all the papers before them before making a decision. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blythe. That takes us to item 5 in your agenda papers, which is the site to the west of Castlewood, Glenroad, Torwood, pages 11 to 81, and the report is by our officer, Julie Seidel-Gregory. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Convener. This proposal relates to the development of 2.57 hectare area of Torwood Ancient Woodland to the south side of Glen Road, which adjoins the village of Torwood. The proposed development seeks planning permission for the construction of 9 large detached dwelling houses with garages. The site slopes up from Glen Road and changes in levels, including platforming, will be required to facilitate development. The houses would be elevated approximately 4 to 5 metres above the existing road level and have a large setback from the road of approximately 40 metres. 2 new vehicular accesses are proposed off Glen Road to serve plots 2 to 9, and plot 1 would be served off an existing private access to the south of the site. Planning permission was refused under delegated powers on the 25th of June 2021. The reasons for refusal included that the proposal represented unjustified housing development in a rural area. Other reasons related to placemaking, loss of woodland and open space, landscaping impact, biodiversity and active travel. An application for review of that decision was submitted on the 19th of August 2021. The application was considered at meetings of the committee in November 2021 and again in March 2022, where committee decided that it was minded to grant the application subject to conclusion of a legal agreement in relation to education and open space contributions and compensatory woodland planting, including planning conditions. The review committee reasoned at that time that the proposal was not in accordance with the development plan, but gave particular weight to the positive contribution development would make to the setting of the area by rounding off the village boundary and the resulting road safety benefits. Unfortunately, the legal agreement was not agreed until after adoption of National Planning Framework 4, which now forms part of the Statutory Development Plan. Section 25 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act requires that decisions are made in accordance with the development plan unless material planning considerations indicate otherwise. The Planning Review Committee did not consider MPF 4 when making their decision. A report was presented to the Review Committee on the 21st of May, where the committee agreed to redetermine the application and to review and invite further submissions from the applicant and the Planning Authority on the impact of MPF 4 on the application, and that an unaccompanied physical inspection of the application site be undertaken. The further submissions are before you in your list of papers for today at pages 13 to 81. This includes submissions from the applicant's agent, the Planning Authority, the Engineering Design Unit and objectors. The site visit was carried out on the 12th of August. Committee should note that there are transitional arrangements in place until such time a new local development plan is adopted by the Council. At this time, our local development plan continues to form part of the development plan, and existing local development plan spatial strategies are maintained. In this case, the local development plan spatial strategy identifies that the application site is designated as being countryside and also open space. Where there are any incompatibilities between MPF 4 policy and LDP policy, the newer of the policy takes priority, which at this time would be MPF 4. Committee should note that MPF 4 requires to be read and applied as a whole. The intent of each of the 33 policies is set out in MPF 4 and can be used to guide decision making. Conflicts between policies are to be expected, and factors for and against development should be weighed up in the balance of making a plan and judgment. A supplementary report on handling was prepared, which makes comments in relation to MPF 4 and compatibility with relevant LDP policies, and that's at Appendix 2, page 46 of your papers from the 21st of May. The adoption of MPF 4 is a significant change to the development plan. I will briefly now give an overview of some MPF 4 policies which may be discussed today, and I apologise if this presentation is slightly longer than anticipated. All members present have a copy of MPF 4 before them with access to all policies, not just those which I'm about to review. Policy 1 is tackling the climate and nature crisis. This is a new policy with no equivalent LDP policy, and its intent is to reduce emissions and to adapt to current and future risks of climate change by promoting nature recovery and restoration. It directs that significant weight is given to the global climate and nature crisis when considering all development proposals. Policy 2, Climate Mitigation and Adaptation. This policy is generally aligned with LDP Policy PE01 Criterion 6. Its intent is to facilitate development which minimises emissions and adapts to current and future risks from climate change. It requires an assessment of siting and design in relation to life cycle greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Policy 3, Biodiversity. This policy is aligned with LDP Policy PE19, and it requires that development proposals contribute to the enhancement of biodiversity, including where relevant, restoring habitats and strengthening nature networks, and that proposals for local development include appropriate measures to conserve, restore and enhance biodiversity. Policy 4, Natural Places. This policy is aligned with LDP policies PE18 and PE19 in this case, and it seeks to protect, restore and enhance natural assets and does not support development which would have an unacceptable impact on the natural environment. Policy 6, Woodland, Forestry, Woodland and Trees. This policy in this case is aligned with LDP policy PE20, and it seeks to enhance, expand and improve woodland and tree cover. This policy does not support the loss of ancient woodlands or an adverse impact on their ecological condition. Developments involving woodland removal are only supported where they achieve significant and clearly defined additional public benefits in accordance with relevant Scottish Government policy on woodland removal. Where woodland is removed, compensatory planting is expected to be delivered. Policy 13, Sustainable Transport. This policy aligns with policies IRO 5 to IRO 9, and it supports development where travel to and from the site have been considered in relation to sustainable travel, including direct, safe and easy links to local facilities via walking and cycling networks. public transport and provision of low and zero emission vehicle and cycle charging facilities. Policy 14, design quality in place. This policy generally aligns with policy PE01, and it requires that development proposals be consistent with the 6 qualities of successful places, which includes criteria in relation to being healthy, pleasant, connected, distinctive, sustainable and adaptive. It also requires that development proposals are designed to improve the quality of an area. PE15, local living and 20-minute neighbourhoods. This is a new policy with no equivalence in LDP. The policy supports local living where people can meet the majority of their daily needs within a reasonable distance of their home, preferably by walking, wheeling and cycling. Development proposals are expected to contribute to local living and includes consideration in relation to local access to sustainable transport, employment, shopping, health and social care, childcare, schools and play facilities. Policy 16, quality homes. This policy aligns with LDP policies HC01, HC02, HC08. In this case, the policy aims to encourage, promote and facilitate the delivery of more high quality, affordable and sustainable homes in the right location. Policy 16 generally supports proposals for new homes on land which is allocated for housing in the local development plan. There are assessment criteria for development proposals for new homes on land which is not allocated for housing in the LTDP, and we can go over this in more detail if the committee wishes to today. Policy 17 on rural homes. This policy aligns with LDP policy HC05. This policy seeks to facilitate the delivery of homes in the right locations and includes a set of circumstances where rural housing will be supported, which includes where the site is allocated for housing, reuses brownfield land, reuses redundant buildings, relates to enabling development for historic assets, is necessary for the sustainable management of a rural business, retirement housing in relation to farming, subdivision of an existing residential dwelling, reinstatement of a former house and like-for-like replacements. And policy 20, blue and green infrastructure. This policy aligns with LDP policy 13. In this case, the policy seeks to protect and enhance blue and green infrastructure and their networks. Development proposals that result in fragmentation or net loss will only be supported where it can be clearly demonstrated that the overall integrity of the network will be maintained. I've tried to give a broad overview of MPF policies which may be of specific relevance to this application today. I'm happy to provide guidance in relation to any of these policies or any other MPF policy or LDP policy as required by the committee as we consider this proposal today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, for that very fulsome submission. My initial wording in relation to this is that members of what we call the local review body at the time decided to put forward a minded to grant decisions subject to the conclusion of a Section 75 agreement. This was on the 18th of March 2022. This was long before NPF 4 was introduced in February 2023. You can understand that their agent, the applicant's agent, was frustrated at this hold-up and states quite clearly in the papers that we have today, in his submission, that in his words, Falkirk Council Planning Department delayed and intervened on the decision by the local review body. I will make no comment on this view, but it's clearly shown in the papers that we have before us today. I was then told by officers, and it's been stated by Mr. Blythe and his wording, that the council had taken external legal advice and that the advice was to take the application back to another review body. And on the 21st of May 2024, a planning report came forward regarding this application with a recommendation to bring it back to the review board to consider the application again in light of the introduction of MPF 4. What was out of the ordinary was that for the first time ever, the agenda papers contained a recommendation from officers to redetermine. I questioned this at the meeting, but to ensure there was a conclusion to this saga, we all agreed, so now we are here to consider this application against National Planning Framework 4 and any other policies. So the first thing I'm going to ask the members, obviously, is the fact is that in line with Regulation 12, the Review Committee may determine at the first meeting that the review documents provide sufficient information to enable them to determine the review, whereupon they may determine the review without further procedure. How do members feel in terms of the information they have before them? Are they happy that they can determine this review without any further procedures? Barely care.
I think I've got adequate information. I've got half a tree here.
Half a
So
tree.
I've got enough information at the moment. I would say so. Convener.
Okay, thank you. But I'll go to everybody just to ensure openness and transparency. Provost Bissett, do you think you've got enough information to?
I think so, Convener. I think we've got enough information, and we had a presentation on NPF4 there, quite detailed. So I think the information we've all got here, I think it's enough to make an informed decision.
Councillor Forrest.
Given the amount of paperwork here, I think that we have probably got enough. I don't think we require any more. Everything should be in here. Julie's just outlined everything more than adequately.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, I have a question actually for Julie. Can you tell me, is there any loss of ancient woodland in this, which is changed in MP4, MPF?
The application site is an area of ancient woodland, so the development area would require that woodland to be felled to facilitate development, so yes.
So according to policy 6, any loss of ancient and veteran trees for adverse impact on their ecological condition, that would actually go against that policy. Am I right?
I wasn't the planning advisor at the last hearing, but I think the review committee accepted that the application was contrary to the development plan, including policies on trees and biodiversity and open space, and that's resulted in the legal agreement, which includes a commuted payment for open space improvements, and it also includes provision for compensatory woodland planting works, which would be at Blair's Farm. If you're interested, I can go over the detail of the replanting works, but that was accepted at the last committee hearing. The question today would be whether members are happy with that stance and what's contained in the legal agreement as it stands at the moment.
So did MPF4 change what would be put for before the committee?
The MPF4 policy on trees is worded differently, but there's no what we would call incompatibility between the LDP policy on trees and the MPF4 policy on trees. That they're generally aligned. The first principle of both of these policies is that you generally should try and protect areas of woodland, particularly ancient woodland. If it can be demonstrated that there is a significant public benefit and that can be compensated for, then in some circumstances that can be accepted. That was clearly accepted by the local review committee at the last hearing.
Thanks, Julie.
Before I bring in Councillor Forrest, because I say in relation to this issue, when we went out there on site in 2022, which will be coming up for 3 years, the site had been cleared. The ancient woodland had been cleared. It was a clear site when we were up there. When we went back up on the site visit, I think one of the members had stated quite clearly when we walked up the side road that vegetation and so forth had grown over the 3 years, and there was no ancient woodland there because it had already been cleared when we went out up on the site visit. So I think that's an important point, and where you want to come back and address that, but because that had been mentioned at the time, because in terms of what you said and replacement, the fact is that members had asked that question in 2022, that site was, when we went up there, it had been completely cleared.
Do you want me to come back in here, convener? Okay, it might help. Just I note that there's some members today that weren't on the review committee last time as well. So just to give a wee recap in terms of woodland, as part of the application process, we got a consultation response from Scottish Forestry. The area of the proposed development is designated as woodland on OS base maps. It's listed within the National Forest Inventory and the Native Woodland Survey for Scotland. The site forms part of the Torwood woodland, which is an ancient woodland of long established plantation origin, and it's likely to have been wooded for at least 150 years. The site is of value because of its woodland soils and seed bank, in addition to the trees, and obviously the wildlife and the ecology value as well as a consideration. The site remains ancient woodland even if there are trees felled. In relation to trees that are felled, part of the development area, 0.66 hectares, is covered by a felling permission which was granted by Scottish Forestry on the 13th of December 2019. The site is 2.6 hectares or thereabouts, so part of the site was covered by a felling permission. Although this gave permission for a portion of the woodland to be felled, it also placed a legal obligation on the landowner to restock the area with Sitka spruce, birch and Scots pine by the 30th of June 2022, and the proposal as it stands for the proposed houses would be considered deforestation. Again, it wasn't the legal advice, the planning advisor at the last hearing, but I note that there was a representation from Scottish Forestry who gave quite a detailed response in relation to the woodland, and that then followed on to the decision that was made on the day. Hopefully that helps.
It does, but it just clarifies the point. But we went up there on site, there was no trees there that had been cleared. The other point, and I'll bring you in a minute, Councillor Forrest, if you could just give us again the information in relation to the replacement of trees, where and when.
Do you mean in terms of the felling licence, or was that the replacement planting?
Replacement planting.
Okay, so the replacement planting as it's in the legal agreement, if you bear with me a second. So the legal agreement as it sits at the moment, and obviously it's not been progressed whilst a decision was being looked at in terms of bringing this back to the review committee. So the legal agreement as it stands includes a commuted payment for education contributions. It includes a commuted payment towards open space, and I'll just read this. It also includes replacement compensatory woodland works, which is new planting on an area of land at Blair's Farm, Bog End Road, Torwood. It's a mixture of locally sourced, broad-leaved trees planted in the following proportions. Cecil oak, 40%, and I apologise if I'm pronouncing any of these trees wrongly. Penuncula oak, 40%, rowan, 10%, wild cherry, 3%, and woody shrubs to be planted in clusters on the perimeter to include crabapple, 1%, bird cherry, 1%, blackthorn 1%, hawthorn 1%, hazel 1%, and holly 1%. Trees to be grouped in species clusters of between 15 and 40 at an average of 1,100 trees per hectare, and it's a total of 3,300 trees which would be planted.
That's fine, and that's what was agreed by members at that particular time. Obviously, we don't want to keep getting back to the original, but that's just part and parcel of what we're here for today, is to take all information into consideration. But that was agreed with members, and that would be part of the conditions in relation to the Section 75 agreement. Am I correct?
That was a clause within the Section 75 agreement.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forrest, sorry to keep you.
No, it's perfectly all right. It's actually brought up another question I had. Excuse me. Impact on biodiversity and wildlife habitats. I take it that's covered now by policy 3 and 4.
Yes, as you rightly state, obviously there are policies in the local development plan which also relate to biodiversity loss, nature networks, and they're generally aligned. There is no incompatibility between MPF4 policies and biodiversity and our local development plan policies and biodiversity. What I would say is that local review committee might want to consider whether there is more emphasis in MPF4 in relation to nature recovery, and to take you back to policy 1, which is tackling the climate and nature crisis. It doesn't have any equivalence in LDP policy, and it states that significant weight should be given to the global climate and nature crisis when considering all development proposals. So the committee might want to consider whether or not this gives added emphasis, but in terms of the core policies, there's no conflict.
Thank you. It's just reading back on the original 7.1. Broadleaved and mixed woodland is a priority habitat in the Falkirk Local Biodiversity Action Plan. The Council's Ranger Service states that red squirrel, pine marten and nesting birds of prey have been recorded and or reported on the woodland. Red squirrel have been reported in the gardens of Glen Road. Red squirrel, pine martens and their respective drays dens are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981. Impacts on biodiversity from loss of habitat or disturbance as a result of a proposed development may occur. Now, convener has just stated that when they went up there, the woodland was no longer there. It had been cleared. So therefore, are these animals still there?
If you're happy for me to respond, convener, at the time of the application, as I understand, there was no ecological reports or surveys produced to allow what I would say is a robust assessment in relation to these claims. Clearly, the information that we would get from the Council's Ranger Service we would take as being robust evidence that you may want to consider backing up with further surveys. That also tallies with some of the comments that we received from neighbours making representation that there is protected species within the area. I personally have not witnessed the site when it was felled. I was not the planning advisor at that time. When we visited the site, there were certainly mature trees on there, and as I'm not an ecologist, but clearly this part of ancient woodland, whether felled or not, forms part of a larger, more significant area of woodland, and I think it would be reasonable to expect that any squirrels or birds may migrate into those other areas of woodland, and at such a time when that habitat regenerates, they may come back to that area. So that's something that the committee might want to consider seeking further information on.
Would indeed, because that's one of the few things that we don't have information on. Plus, I'm beginning to get a feeling that, like so many plans that come before us, the developer tries to preempt things by taking away trees, etc., so that there is no compelling reason to refuse. And I'm getting quite frustrated with this happening time and time again.
To be honest with you, don't want to interrupt you, but at that particular stage, I would say we'd have to watch what we're saying in relation to anything that had been done on that site, because we have not got that information to say that it was the applicant that cleared it, because I believe that there was legal situation in the Torwood area in relation to tree felling, and I think we've got to ensure that we've got to be very careful what we say and who we pinpoint. Thank you.
Thank you for that, convener. If I've overstepped, I apologise. I'm talking generally. A great many things that come before us have been altered. So if I have caused offence, I apologise. But again, I haven't seen this site, so I'm going on what you were saying to me, that this has been cleared. And if it's been cleared and there's no longer the woodland for these animals to survive, then it changes everything, doesn't it?
Just to clarify, I think you were on the site visit in August, Councillor Forrest, yes. I think, sorry, I think if you recall, we walked up towards Torwood Castle up the lane and we looked in at the site from.
Yeah. I'll come to Bailey Kerr or the Provost. You want to come in at this stage? Bailey
Just
Kerr.
a quick question, Convener. When has been mentioned 2 or 3 times about the trees being felled previously, do we know how many it was or just the size of area?
The information, I don't have individual trees, but it was a 0.66 hectare.
I wasn't really,
Yeah.
no bother about
Means
this,
nothing.
no bother about the kind of trees, that was just the
Numbers. I
The
don't
num-
know. I don't know if that. I've certainly
Or
not seen it in the
size acre,
papers.
the size
Just the
acreage
size of
would
it,
would
yeah.
probably be suffice.
0.66. This site overall is approximately 2.6, so it's about a fifth of the site
Right,
was,
okay.
had a felling licence. I can't comment on the condition of the site.
Yeah,
When you visited it last time, only the site as we seen it when we went up on site, and there certainly was mature trees. There was certainly regeneration there.
Yeah.
There was trees on site that I've seen.
so see the trees that the convener mentioned, and you highlighted the different sizes or different kinds of trees. Do we know, does it say in the report what size that would be?
No, it just gives a description as I read out in terms of the sort of planting mix.
Yeah.
So it gives percentages of oak and cherry. It talks about groupings and it gives the numbers of trees. There is obviously, we can go through the conditions if members want to, but there's obviously conditions on there as well, which talked about, landscaping details. I don't think it would cover this external planting, but if that was something that members wanted included in the legal agreement, there's obviously scope to have that looked at as part of any decision moving forward.
Well, I was just trying to get this, or the trees have came down, but would the trees that's getting proposed, would it be a like for like? And that's all I'm trying to get.
I think looking at this, it's more of a mix. One that you would certainly see more within a sort of landscape and a farm setting. It might not be. I mean, they're talking about cherry and apple. Some of these trees, tree species, might not be ones that you would necessarily see at the site. Albeit, I don't have details of the actual species of trees in the mix that we have there at the moment.
And another question on the trees, because we seem to focus on them. See where these trees have been felled and have had a licence. Is this one of the areas, because the Forest and I have got areas in our ward where they come and fell trees and plant them, then they grow up to the size and fell them again. So it's just a constant growing and felling. Is that the kind of area it is?
This Torwood woodland does have areas of commercial woodland within it.
That's what I was looking at.
Commercial woodland. I'm not aware of this site being commercial. I think it's an ancient woodland. I couldn't give you the specific answer to that. Clearly, however, they do need a licence if they're going to do any felling, and there is a legal expectation that it's restocked.
Yeah.
I probably can't answer that
Right,
question
okay,
for you.
Okay.
Could I say at this stage that in terms of the massive amount of paperwork that we've had in relation to this item, the fact is that the submissions both from the applicant's agent and the objectors were very fulsome, and that it's taken me days and days to go through them. Just going back to to what you were saying there, Julie, in relation to the trees and the agreement to re-establish in another area. Can you quantify how much in terms of finance this would be? Does it state that?
I don't have a finance figure. That I can give you financial figures for the open space contribution and the education contribution. Yep. There's no figure putting on the woodland works. It's just very specific in terms of the number of trees and the mix.
Right. Okay, thank you. Provost.
Thanks very much, Convener. I wasn't there on the last site visit, but I've since been up to the site and had a good look around. I'm pleased to hear there's compensatory planting that will be available for the trees that have been, well, they weren't there when I first went to the site. But they'll be planted in Blair's Farm, so it'll make up for these trees that are not there. So I just wanted to ask about, I think Julie just touched on it there, about the education payment. Before it was 2,428. What would be the difference if this was agreed?
The figure that I have in the legal agreement is £21,859.20 sterling. If you want, I can go back and I can give you an overview of the education consultation response that we received. Mm-hmm. It's likely that any change in that figure, obviously there's been quite a passage of time since this application was originally determined. We update our education figures annually, and that's in our SG on as in our SG. So it's possible that there's been a change in figures all the time, and that's reflected in the legal agreement.
And I wonder if you just explain a commuted payment towards addressing enabling opportunities for the green and blue network in the area. What exactly is that?
The legal agreement has an open space payment of £21,643 sterling to be spent in the local area. I don't have specific information on where that would be spent. Once concluded and once that money is drawn down and is with the council, there's usually a range of open space opportunities which would be identified, and it would then be spent appropriately, often and particularly with the passage of time, when money is included in a legal agreement, the particular project that it's envisaged that money may be spent on. As time moves on, there might be other priorities. So I can't give you a specific project. And
when there was amended to grant application, was there any other conditions attached at the time?
Yes, there was a number of conditions which I can go through with members if they want to review those today. Okay, so condition number 1 is a standard condition that we apply to most of our planning permissions, and it just states that the development shall be implemented in accordance with the plans unless a variation is agreed, and that's very standard. It's a reminder for a developer that they should be building in accordance with their plans. Condition number 2 is another fairly standard condition that we would see in most applications for housing, and it's our contaminated land condition, which many of you will be familiar with, and it requires a submission in relation to contamination at the site, and it talks about remediation and agreement, validation reports and so forth. Condition number 3 again is a fairly standard condition, and that's our condition on low and zero carbon generating technologies, and it requires the developer to come forward with their sustainability label and their statement of conformity, which would confirm that 12% of the required CO2 emissions reductions is achieved through the installation of low and zero carbon generating technologies. Mm-hmm. Condition number 4, prior to any works on site, a surface water drainage strategy is required to be submitted and approved in writing, and thereafter the development shall be carried out in accordance with the details approved under this condition. Condition number 5, prior to any works on site, a flood risk assessment or flood risk statement shall be submitted for the written approval of this planning authority, and thereafter the development shall be carried out in accordance with the details approved in the condition. Condition number 6, development shall not begin until details of the earthworks have been submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority, details of existing and proposed levels in relation to a fixed datum, the contours in relation to surrounding vegetation and landform, and development should be carried out in accordance with approved details. I'm assuming that that condition came forward just in light of the change in levels, the cut and fill in platform, which appears to be required to facilitate this development. Condition number 7 was requiring details of hard and soft landscaping works. Again, it's a fairly standard condition for a development of this size, particularly when you've got quite a lot of vacant space, particularly to the front of the site, and it's looking for things like vegetation, materials of walls and fences, landscaping works, and services. Condition number 8 requires all landscaping works to be implemented to the satisfaction of the planning authority by the end of the first planting and seeding season. Again, is a fairly standard condition. Condition number 9 is a condition requiring details of the materials to be used in the external surfaces of the buildings and any construction of any hard surfaces, walls and fences. Condition number 10 was requiring, and it's in 4 parts. This is your roads conditions. It requires vehicular access to be formed via dropped curb footway crossing in accordance with the minor roadwork consent. That driveways are a maximum of a gradient of 10% and no surface water is discharged or loose material onto the public road. Visibility displays of 2.4 metres by 60 metres onto Glen Road. A 2 metre wide adoptable footway along the length of the application site onto Glen Road, which is a distance of 200 metres. And then there were some informatives, which again are fairly standard looking at them here. So the first one was in relation to development commencing within 3 years. Informative number 2 provides clarification on the application numbers, which forms the permission. And again, there's an informative that we tend to put on, which is just a bit noisy hours and noisy working and hours of work. The 2 conditions that we don't have, which members may want to consider, would just be in relation to protected species and ecology before there's any further tree felling or development commences on site. And despite there being a condition in relation to landscaping, I note that there is a 25 metre wide woodland strip to the rear of the site. There doesn't appear to be a condition that would make it explicit that that should be retained. My concern may be if members may be concerned that there could be pressure for further development within this area, or indeed just looking at the size of this site, if this application is approved, in effect it establishes the principle of development on this site, and there could then be pressure for actually more units or a more dense development. It's just a thought looking at the layout here and something that the review committee might want to consider.
Okay, thanks very much. That's my thoughts for now, Convener.
Obviously, I've been spending an awful lot of time looking through the policies, obviously NPF 4, and the submissions from all parties, including the applicant and the objectors. When we had previously met and taken the minded to grant decision, I don't want to keep going back to that, but it's so relevant. It was taken after consideration of all the information we had received, and there was a hearing as well, giving particular weight to the positive contribution that development of this site would make to the overall setting and balance of the village. With a rounding off of the village limits and the road safety benefits, we decided on balance, and having assessed the relevant policies at that time, that the proposal, although it was not in accordance with the local development plan 2, it would result in a positive visual definition of the settlement. These were the main reasons for the members' decision during the hearing. The applicant's agent brought out a detailed map that showed the number of applications that had been granted in the Torwood area that were contrary to the development plan that had been agreed by all members of the planning committee over the years. When we were out in sight the first time, there at the edge of the site was a storage wood yard. Now, people that's went back to it, there is 2 new modern houses on this site. It was recommended to grant by officers despite it being contrary to the development plan. The former forest had been cut down when we were there first time. Recently going back, lots of bushes and small trees, but none of the ancient woodlands there. But it's been stated quite clearly by Julie in her submission in relation to that area of ground in terms of woodland. It was an agreement including the section 75 to re-establish in another area with compensatory planting. So the fact of the matter is that I've got that much paperwork here that we have a mountain of paperwork. I've been taking all these notes over the past week, but a mountain of paperwork today's meeting. I have for the past few days concentrated on why this meeting was called for, assessing the application against MPF4 policies. I have scanned the council's report and the fulsome submission from the applicant's agent and the submission from the objectors. So I have, well, obviously, in relation to 2 of our colleagues here at the meeting today, we maybe have had more information because of the fact is that we've already had a meeting to discuss this. We already had a very fulsome meeting and a hearing to discuss this, and obviously maybe we are better prepared for the decision making today. But the question was asked at the very beginning of the meeting, how we felt in terms of had we enough information. And I would say that I think we have got enough information in terms of all the reports that's come in. And I'd like to thank the officers of the council for bringing forward these reports. It's obviously been a long time coming to come back here to make a final decision on this. And I'm hopeful that members will be available to make that decision today. Provost?
Since the mandate to grant decision, I think MPF4 policies fit nicely into the mandate to grant decision. Previously, I don't see a great deal of change. Biodiversity, natural places, forestry and woodland trees, energy, sustainable transport. I think they're all things that are built into the policy, and any decision we take, we can set conditions. So these things, flood risk, water management, already part of the conditions and stuff like that. So me personally, I'd be quite happy to move the application, grant it.
Thank you. This would be a 90 grant, would it be again?
I think it would just be an endorsement of the previous minded to grant decision, and perhaps there could be some discussion about additional conditions that Julie had highlighted earlier.
Yeah.
Have we got a second for the provost?
No, it was something else.
Billy.
I looked at the policies that were highlighted, convener 15 and 16, although there were other policies that Julie's already mentioned, but they were the 2 from NPF4 that was the main concern.
Yeah.
And I probably agree with the provost that policy 15, 20-minute neighbourhood. In the Scottish Government's guidance, you understand that no every area will be like towns and cities. So there will be areas where villages won't have the same supports as in shops and dentists and doctors. However, the policy allows you to, there is a road network there, there is transport at the Boatme, public transport at the Boatme Torwood, as the council themselves have provided housing there. So it falls into the 20-minute neighbourhood. And the policy 16, the quality homes, I think if we've seen the plans previously, if they intend to build the 9 houses, now I wouldn't envisage any more than that being put in there. After the quality what's already been built and the meat or the environmentally friendly and environment issues or design, I think they meet the 2 policies that were highlighted. The other ones that Julie mentioned, most of them didn't have any difference for the local development plan 2. There is compatibles in there. However, as I always say, convener, it's up to a person's interpretation of that. So I'm quite happy to second the provost on the.
Minded to grant subject to
Yes.
discussion on the.
Yeah.
Is that right, Mr. Bland?
And on just for the reasons that I've gave.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Taylor.
First of all, I wasn't a member of any previous councils, so I'm looking for what's happening today, what's in the notes today, and for the future. Julie, I believe, said that, I hope I'm not misquoting you here, it would be difficult if someone else came along and looked to apply for planning permission for that sort of area. It would be difficult to refuse it if they grant this one. Am I right or wrong?
Yes, I mean, I think this is quite a large expansion of Torwood. I think in some of the papers, like the commentary you've received from a policy, colleagues commented that it's a 20% increase on the village. Under normal circumstances, expansions of that size should really be considered as part of a local plan process. The local plan process can take a number of years. It includes consultation with the local community. It includes forward planning for services such as education, healthcare and so forth. And it also ensures that there is design parameters that are put forward in that housing allocation. I think McLaren Park and the former Torwood School have both been mentioned in the previous hearing by objectors and by the applicant. Both of those sites were allocated. I think that this site has been looked at in previous local plans. The local plan boundary was considered carefully when our current local plan was adopted in 2020. So if this application is approved, the reason I mention it is just to make members aware that the granting of this planning permission establishes the principle of residential development on that site, while still have planning permission for 9 houses. If a further application came forward for a different residential development, I think some of the issues that were raised in the original report and handling from the case officer in terms of loss of open space, loss of woodland and development in the countryside, those would be very hard to try and defend because of planning history for the site, and that planning approval would become a very strong material planning consideration. So I think it's just something to bear in mind.
Okay, thanks for that, Julie. Second point, you said that they'd only filled a small proportion area, mature trees in the other portion of it that would have to be felled.
I wasn't at the first site visit that we carried out. The conveners mentioning there that when they visited the site first time round, there was quite clearly there was trees cleared on the site. When we visited the site, it wasn't clear to me where those trees had been cleared. It looked like quite a densely treed area. Certainly if I was up there as a member of the public, it wouldn't be obvious to me that there'd been any felling. But obviously Scottish Forestry would manage any felling, any future felling licences. There is requirements for restocking. And clearly I would think there would also be another separate process that the applicant would need to go through in terms of felling licences if this application was successful. So I can only really comment on what we've seen on site and what we have in the papers, which was a felling licence for a portion of the site of 0.66 hectares.
Would it have to reapply for another licence to fell any other trees?
Potentially, that's
area?
something that would be
Right.
that would be Scottish Forestry that would provide advice on that. I mean, planning's only one permission that a developer may need to get. I always talk about development. Building things is like an onion, and planning's only one layer of that onion. They need their building warrant, they need their Scottish Water approval, there might be legal agreements, or they might need to buy the site. They might also need other permissions, and felling might be something that they would need to look at separately. I'm not an expert on it, and I wouldn't want to comment that they need to do that.
Understand that.
Okay, thanks.
But when you said that, sorry, I lost my track there. They'll have to, if we agree with this in principle, we're still leaving it open to the people coming along. That what we were talking about earlier there.
This planning approval quite clearly relates to the 9 houses. They will have planning approval for that. This site is not allocated for housing, it's out with the village limit. If this application is approved, and if a further application came along, and we're talking in what ifs, it's things that have happened in the past, or as it could potentially happen. And that, in fact, there's been applications that have came before committee where we've said, this is still in the countryside, it's contract policy, but you've got an extant planning permission for whatever. You're establishing the principle of residential development on the site. So, in effect, by the mechanism of getting planning permission, you're extending the village boundary.
Right, and yeah, I can understand that, and that's wrong. Can I go back to trees, because you might all be sick of hearing it, but I quite honestly, I think it's very important that we keep our ancient woodlands. It's a different type of soil in woodlands because trees have been grown there for 150 years. So compensatory trees doesn't make up for that. It'll take 150 years for that soil to go around and to, as it is in Torwood just now. And some species of plants only grows in that type. So by 100 years, that species might have disappeared because we've built houses on top of that land. So if you, the reason that it's still included in the ancient woodlands, that site, although it's being felled, the soil is still the type of soil that certain species need to develop on. So that's why they leave it within the boundaries, yeah. So I'm not too sure if it's right for us to go ahead with this to pass this without thinking more about the future and people in the future and our ancient forest, which I mean, that forest contains the Wallace oak, is it? That's still in that forest, where apparently William Wallace rested between I think it was Battle of Bannockburn and something else. Anyway, that's not as important as keeping our history alive. So, can we have a wee 5 minutes to think of this, the amendment I'm going to put to this?
Okay.
That all right?
Okay, Douglas, we'll have a 10-minute comfort break.
Good. All right, okay. That's it. Right.
Douglas, it's a 10-minute comfort break.
1 minute. 1 minute. Right. Okay, folks, we're ready to reconvene this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your consideration for the comfort break. We'll now go back to Councillor Kelly, the Deputy Convener. Thank you, sir.
Hi. Right. In the interest of the people of Torwood and beyond, I believe that we are, as a nation, should not be accepting things like this. We shouldn't be wasting our historical background. In particular, due to the loss of ancient woodlands and the loss of the soil that is very important to native woodlands for certain species and for biodiversity, we should not be voting in favour of this this motion. Taking policies 1, 3, 4 and 6 into consideration from NPF 4. And the extension of the village boundary is wrong and should be held off until LPD 3 has been consulted and carried out. So I move that we do not accept the motion to carry the application forward.
Okay, so that's Councillor Kelly's amendment. Billy, can you see your light on? Or is it Councillor Forrest?
Oh,
Did you hear?
I
Say something?
yeah, please. Can I just ask a question regarding, can't remember if it was yourself, convener, mentioned about the 2 houses that were built at the start of that area. And my understanding is one was in the local development plan and other wasn't. And recommendation from planning was that we accept it because it outweighs the development plan. And I can't recall being at the meeting, but apparently I was, and I've agreed with it.
Yeah, I feel like that.
And I've agreed with it. However, if we're saying if you accept these 9 in the area, we've already accepted 1 in the area that's contrary to local development plan. Is that correct?
I'm happy to comment on that. I wasn't the case officer for those 2 houses, but I understand that there were buildings on that site previously. Some of you may recall them. So that part of the site is actually where the houses are built to the front is within the village boundary of Torwood. And the footprint of the houses that have been built there are on the footprint of buildings which were previously there. As I understand it, the reason that application was presented to Planning Committee was because the garden area to the rear did extend out with the village limit boundary, which technically made it contrary to policy. However, the actual footprint of built development there is within the village boundary and was on the footprint of buildings that were there for some time.
I don't want to say you're wrong, Julie, but it was asked at the last meeting, and the second house towards it, there was a garage, an old shed there, and a garage, but the second house was definitely not in the local development plan. I don't know even if it was in the garden ground. I'm unsure. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm sure we were told that it was out with the local development plan, that second to see.
To be honest with you, whatever you're saying, just to reaffirm the situation was that the recommendation came from officers to grant that application, and but it was contrary to the local development plan. we can't define exactly how it was contrary, but it came to committee, and the reason it came to committee was because it was contrary to the local development plan. Okay, Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Convener. When it comes to destroying our ancient woodlands, and that's what this is, right? I don't believe that there's any such thing as compensatory planting. How can you compensate for a woodland that has been there for hundreds, thousands of years perhaps, which is self-seeding, self-propagating? The soil is unique. The seeds there, completely natural. So I don't really agree with cutting down the ancient woodland. I also don't agree with cutting it down because of the ecology within that area. The animals, we've heard of squirrels, pine martens. How many of you have actually seen a red squirrel in this area? It's a rarity. Same with pine martens. And we should be protecting these. So it would be the loss of ancient woodland. The possibility, there is a possibility that other people would come in and want to build further on. So it would be in breach of policies 1, 3, 4 and 6, as we said. And it would totally destroy the biodiversity that is there. It is on the boundary of the village, and it's encroaching onto the green belt. And that's happening a lot within a lot of the villages and towns in Falkirk District. And they're the very reasons that Falkirk District is so popular with people and they want to come here, because there are small villages and whatnot, and basically they're all just growing together. And I've got to second Councillor Kelly, because I really don't believe that this would be a good point to do. Thank you.
Thank you for your input there, sir. So just to clarify where we are, we have a motion moved by Provost Bissett.
Could I just say
a
little thing? What Bailey Kerr brought up there was one of the problems I found with it. That there was one house already in the area. Now we're going to have 9 houses. Then we're going to have 18 houses. And until LPT 4 comes along, I don't think we should be building any more houses outside the boundary of the village. And for that reason.
Thank you all for your contributions. Just to clarify where we are, we have a motion moved by Provost Bissett, seconded by Bailey Kerr, that we're minded to grant, and we'll get the correct terminology from our legal advisor. We have an amendment by Deputy Convener Alf Kelly, seconded by Councillor Forrest, that we do not and refuse this application. We'll just go back to our legal officer just to clarify everything. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Convener. My noting of the motion from Councillor Bissett was that that the committee be minded to endorse the previous minded to grant decision for the reasoning outlined within that decision, subject to the contributions towards compensatory planting, education and open space that were previously agreed. That was proposed by Provost Bissett and seconded by Bailey Kerr. Could I just clarify that the 2 conditions that Julie had discussed earlier relating to ecology and the tree belt along the rear of the site, that they are to be included within the conditions? And against that, there is an amendment from Councillor Kelly seconded by Councillor Forrest, to refuse the application on the basis of that the application is contrary to policies 1, 3, 4 and 6 of MPF 4, and in particular that the effect on the ancient woodland soils and biodiversity is unacceptable, and also that the concerns over the extension of the village boundary. And we'll just go to the vote. Convener, Bailey Buchanan.
Motion.
Councillor Kelly.
Amendment?
Provost Bissett.
Motion.
Councillor Forrest.
Amendment.
And Bailey Kerr.
Motion.
There are 3 votes for the motion, 2 for the amendment. The motion is carried.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then, just to thank everybody for their contribution this morning. Obviously, members of the Planning Committee will be back here this evening at 6 o'clock for the predetermination hearing. Other than that, I would like to thank officers as well, and officers who aren't here that have put in contributions to this this long case. Thank you very much, everybody. Safe
Well,
journey
thanks to
home.
the chair.